Hi, I'm Tim Shirley, Senior Minister of the South Shore United Church of Christ. This is the sermon for June the 14th, 2020. It's called The Place Where It All Began. I nearly could not contain my excitement when I saw the lectionary text for today. For in these lections, at least the readings from Genesis and Matthew, we find cornerstone text revealing the primacy of hospitality found throughout the biblical narrative, Hebrew Bible and Christian scriptures alike. The story of Abraham and Sarah is a rich narrative allowing for a wide-ranging emphasis in preaching and teaching. Most tend to follow the easy steps and connect the obvious dots and build a devotional tableau around God's promise to Abraham that he would become the father of many nations, his offspring counted like the stars. Yes, that storyline is in there. A simple, shallow surface reading will quickly give you that much. Of course, accompanying that wonderful tale at the heart of the text is the outrageously preposterous idea that Abraham's wife would give birth to a son. Both Abraham and Sarah were way past childbearing years, according to conventional wisdom. We know that when this radically ridiculous suggestion is made to this couple, now well on the move, far away from their ancestral homeland, that Sarah laughed at the notion, belittling the whole bizarrely incredulous idea. Who's zooming who? That's just nuts. And yes, that plot is in there too. In fact, the official desk calendar and plan book for the United Church of Christ suggests Sarah laughed as the theme around which to build a service and sermon. Ho-hum, same old, same old. It is important to remember that behind every good storyline in the Bible, there is always the subplot, the hidden meanings just waiting for the reader to uncover and decipher. And so it is in this story of Abraham and Sarah as they bask in their comfortable oasis in the shade under the oaks of Mamre, the twinkling stars of night. The senior adult couple is approached by strangers, men who seem to appear as if out of nowhere. But the reader is quickly, wink, wink, nod, nod, keyed into the fact that these were not ordinary men. No, but were divine beings, walking and talking, perhaps personages that the book of Hebrews would later describe as angels unaware. They were living mysteries wrapped in enigma. They eat, they talk, yet they are mysterious, cloaked in mystery and intrigue. They were indeed an enigma. Like the movie The Blues Brothers, these men were on a mission from God. Their divine task to inform Abraham and Sarah about more of God's unfolding plans for them. Theologically, we call what is taking place here continuing revelation, the unfolding byproduct of process theology. What we discover in the sudden appearance of these men is the first specific event of Near Eastern hospitality anywhere in the biblical narrative. Seeing them in the distance. Think the story of the erstwhile prodigal son upon his return, spotted from afar by his waiting father. Abraham rises from the comfort of his shaded rest and springs into action. Surely startled, the one-day anointed patriarch and father of the nations knows that danger looms and lurks. always a threat on the horizon, that his family and flock may be at risk. The line between hospitality and hostility was always as thin as a razor's edge. Sadly, the origins of nomadic hospitality, eventually taken to new heights by the Bedouin, was a matter of necessity, not benevolence. The rules found in the rubrics of hospitable practices were by design created to assure the safety of all parties, guests and hosts alike. It was a kind of détente. Hospitality allowed for safe passage of travelers who often needed the sustenance that a host could provide in the wilderness. Trust was always at a minimum, mistrust at a maximum. When strangers were thrust into the mix, fear and anxiety always simmering beneath the surface, this is the scenario we find in this heavily nuanced text. Abraham rushes to greet his honored guests, whipped into a frenzy revealed by the rapid motions shown in the narrative. He barks out orders, giving instructions to servants and to his wife. Water must be made ready to drink and available to wash weary traveling feet. Food must be prepared to serve. Not just any food will do, because a lavish feast is always expected in this initial encounter on the first day. 3 days was the assumed limit to a stay unless negotiations proved otherwise. By day 3, spam could be served, the not so white meat. But on this day, a calf, tender and good, would be on the menu. Thank God, no salad in sight. Remember the fatted calf in that prodigal story. I think I see a pattern. I think I see a parallel. Only the best will do. If you have fine china, now is a fine time to use it. Abraham, no doubt feeling the pressure, rises to the occasion and presents a flawless effort, his guests luxuriating in the host's accommodations. It was as good as it gets on the dusty trail. And just as soon as this clandestine meeting took place, the ancient custom of Near Eastern hospitality flawlessly illustrated in the story, the perfect paradigm or template, no doubt an intentional goal of the writer. The travelers make their goodbyes, exit stage left as they move on to the enclaves of Sodom and Gomorrah, where they would find less than suitable surroundings. Hospitality not only absent, but replaced by an inhospitable hostility. The biblical writers, editors, and compilers wanted the reader to see the juxtaposition of the proper response in the story of Abraham and Sarah by the terebinths of Mamre against the backdrop of the travesty that transpired at Abraham's nephew's home. Ironically, Lot himself an alien, and therefore a guest in his own right in a foreign land. That nuance only adding to the irony of Lot, of all people in the town, offering the appropriate, expected, and required hospitality. In all honesty, these stories should never be separated because they are part and parcel of the same narrative. Remember, no chapters and verses in the original manuscripts. We all know what happens at Sodom and Gomorrah. It is always what happens when certain Some human beings seek to inflict pain and suffering upon another. It is always what happens when certain human beings assume a position of power, strength, and superiority. This always happens when oppression lurks, when some are deemed more worthy, more supreme than others. Are you getting the picture? Our nation, our world, seen through the 2020 lens of 2020, has not learned the lesson, continuing to classify and categorize human beings to create false status while building barriers and walls, all the while destroying the fragile bridges that are so desperately needed in our tiny global village. Yes, we see it every day. Yes, we see its effects. The stark realities in these two Hebraic stories that are really one are as crystal clear, as transparent as they can be. How people continue to misinterpret and misappropriate the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is beyond my wildest imagination, my most jaded and skeptical cynicism. Interestingly, Jesus had a thought about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and their unfortunate fate in their sudden demise. So let's look to him for some wit and wisdom, and perhaps a solution, shall we? Jesus tells his novice disciples that they are going on a mission to their own kind, avoiding and ignoring Gentiles and Samaritans. Jesus evidently still desperately needing an inclusive learning curve in his own right. But I digress. I often do. Remember, Jesus believed that he came first and foremost to the Jews, wanted them to clean up their own house before they dared mess with anyone else's. Not a bad policy. He instructed the 12 to take nothing with them other than the clothes on their backs. They are to go house to house, sharing the good news of the gospel with the occupants. Good news and gospel. Now that is redundant. Bringing the word of peace and blessing, the salvation we understand to come with Jesus' message of loving welcome and invitation. Those who received these disciples in the spirit in which they came were to be blessed. But woe to those who refused the disciples' overtures, for they were to be cursed, the dust on the disciples' feet shaken off in their presence as a testimony against them. A little harsh, we might think. Jesus even warns his closest, "Look, I'm sending you as sheep among wolves, therefore be wise as snakes and innocent as doves." Wow. Now there is some metaphorical sobriety. But there is one line. There is one line to which I call your undivided attention. It is rather subtle, seemingly innocuous, almost hidden in this long narrative, easily overlooked, easily forgotten. But it is a linchpin in this story. It is found in this word of warning that Jesus reveals to the disciples. But to the unexpected, unwitting host is not revealed. For those who do not gladly, graciously receive the disciples as guests in the home of these erstwhile hosts, Jesus says, and I quote, "I assure you that it will be more bearable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on Judgment Day than it will be for that city." Firstly, the indictment will be held against the host city based on the actions of the one host household. Wow. Really? That's harsh. Secondly, Jesus is reminding his disciples of the sacred covenant expected in the unexpected guest-host relationship. Inhospitality is the pivotal primary sin for which there seems to be no forgiveness, no grace or mercy, for it is rooted in how one human being treats another, especially, particularly, specifically, those who are, as the Hebrew Bible declares, aliens, foreigners, strangers. And don't dare forget the widows and orphans. This is the axis on which Jesus' message and all the Bible turns. For those who continue to believe that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was sexual in nature, homosexual in nature, read Jesus' lips. Read this text. That dog won't hunt. That pig won't fly. Get over it. I choose to interpret this text the same way that Jesus did. I don't think we can go wrong there. At the root of hospitality lies the greatest commandment about loving God, neighbor, and self. Without it, all the biblical narrative is but a house of cards and comes crashing down in a pile of irrelevant nonsense. The Bible tells me so. If we choose to make the story of Sodom and Gomorrah about homosexuality, then we can dismiss it as irrelevant, not germane to our lives in any way imaginable, because we are not gay. Most of us. If indeed this is merely a story about rape, male dominance, then how could this story ever impact us? It is ask and answer. If we reduce it to the least common denominator, then it becomes nothing more than a great story, an epic tale that has nothing to do with us, nothing to teach us. The scary thing is that this is exactly what we tend to do with many of the texts of the Bible. They are always about someone else. They are somebody else's problem. Surely these narratives are not addressed to us any more than they might apply to us. It reminds me of the joke about the preacher who preached a sermon to his congregation during a blizzard. Only one man bothered to show that day, but as they say, the show must go on. The preacher did his thing. It happened to be the same individual who, upon exiting and shaking the preacher's hand every Sunday, would exclaim, "You really told them today, preacher." Well, as he left the building on this snowy Sunday, the preacher wondered what this old curmudgeon would have to say on his way out the door. As he took the preacher's hand, he affirmed, "Well, preacher, if they had been here, you would have really told them." Sometimes I think we, at least on a subliminal level, do this very thing with the Bible. We do that because we know what it says based on what we have always heard, what we have always learned. Folks, there is always a word yet to be revealed, just ready to be discovered, if we will allow the still speaking Spirit of God to open our minds and explore the breadth and depth of these incredibly rich texts. Try it sometime. May we become a better republic, a better democratic society, because yes, we are both. May we be the harbingers of the gospel that Jesus has called all his followers to be. Just like on the day he invited the original 12 on the journey of a lifetime, as missionaries of grace, mercy, peace, and love, hospitality. The very DNA for living as local and universal beloved faith community. In the words of St. Francis, may we be instruments of peace, knowing the hard work that lofty agenda demands. May we also fulfill another desire of St. Francis in his phrase, preach the gospel at all times, use words if necessary. Finally, may we live by the social justice maximum attributed to John Wesley, who spoke of doing the greater good as a follower of Jesus. Do all the good that you can by all the means that you can, in all the ways that you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you can. There. I think I've covered the big ones. May we, as the very embodiment of Christ, come close to bringing a level of hospitality desperately needed in our hurting world. In the name of the one who creates, redeems, and sustains, and calls us to extend the hospitality that has already been extended to us and continues day by day from the holy. Amen and amen.